It was the kind of injustice that people read about, but never think will happen to them. The day Naomi Johnson walked into her office expecting a long overdue promotion, only to be demoted instead, was the day she realized just how deep corporate racism could run. And it was also the day she decided to burn the entire system down. LX. For 6 years, Naomi had given everything to Crestwood and Lane, a prestigious investment firm that prided itself on diversity and inclusion, at least in their carefully curated public image. Behind closed doors, it was a different story. Every boardroom meeting, she was talked over. Every major deal she landed, her white male colleagues took credit. Every promotion cycle, she was always so close, but never chosen. Yet, she endured, because she believed naively that hard work would eventually force them to acknowledge her. That illusion shattered on Tuesday morning at exactly 8:45 a.m. Naomi's heels clicked sharply against the marble floor as she made her way toward the executive wing. Her heart pounded, not with nerves, but excitement. Today was supposed to be the day, her day. She had outperformed every other candidate, closing a $2.7 million deal single-handedly. She had worked weekends, nights, holidays. She had done the job without the title for months. But the moment she stepped into Mr. Holloway's office, she knew something was wrong. Holloway, her boss, a graying, stiff-mannered man in his mid-50s, refused to meet her eyes. His fingers drummed against his mahogany desk, a fake smile tugging at his thin lips. Seated beside him, Ethan Coleman, a junior-level analyst, a man she had personally trained, a man with a resume so thin it was practically blank. Naomi's breath caught in her throat. She already knew what was coming. Holloway cleared his throat. "Naomi, we've been looking at the future of this company, and after much discussion, we've decided to go in a different direction." The words felt like a punch to the stomach. "Excuse me?" she asked, her voice deceptively calm. Holloway continued, his tone dripping with false sympathy. "Ethan has shown tremendous potential, and we believe he embodies the kind of leadership that aligns with Crestwood's vision." Naomi's eyes flickered to Ethan. He looked down at the table. Even he knew this was wrong. "So let me get this straight," Naomi said, leaning forward. "You're promoting the person I trained, the person with no management experience, the person who, just last week, asked me how to run a basic client report, and you're demoting me?" Holloway sighed, like he was being forced to explain himself to a child. "Naomi, this isn't personal. It's business. And I hope you'll take this professionally." Professionally? The word nearly made her laugh. Because when Michael Sanders, a white colleague with the same qualifications as her, was up for promotion, they bent over backwards to push him forward. When John Parker, a man with a fraud investigation on his record, needed a character reference, they made it disappear. But when Naomi, a black woman with an impeccable track record, was up for the same opportunities, they suddenly had concerns. She sat in stunned silence as Holloway slid a HR document across the desk. A formal demotion, effective immediately, a salary cut, a loss of managerial power, like she was being punished for daring to excel. The shocking inconsistencies? Naomi had closed more high-value deals in the past year than any other employee. She had 0 disciplinary actions. The firm had never promoted a black employee to senior leadership, ever. This wasn't just about her. It was a pattern. She inhaled slowly, forcing herself to remain composed. Because while Holloway thought he was putting her in her place, he had just made the biggest mistake of his career. Naomi didn't leave that office defeated. She left with a plan, because what Holloway didn't know was that she had been preparing for this moment for months. She had seen the red flags long ago, the way executives quietly blacklisted certain employees, the accidental pay discrepancies, the whispers of illegal business practices. So she had started collecting data. Every racist remark, every unethical deal, every policy violation. And beyond that, she had secured investors. See, while Holloway and his cronies were too busy dismissing her, Naomi had been building something bigger. Because she knew something they didn't. Crestwood and Lane was in financial trouble. Their shady dealings had finally caught up with them. Investors were losing confidence. Stocks were falling. And Naomi? She was about to make her move. For the next 3 months, she worked in the shadows. She used her demotion to her advantage. People ignored her now, letting critical information slip in her presence. She leaked damaging reports to investigative journalists. She fed stock analysts insider warnings. She rallied investors who were desperate for a way out. And then, she made her offer. By the time the board realized what was happening, it was too late. 3 months after her demotion, Naomi walked through the glass doors of Crestwood and Lane. But this time, she wasn't an employee. She was the new owner. The investors had sided with her. Her proposal had been airtight. She had bought out the majority shares at a bargain price because the company was already circling the drain. The firm had undervalued her for years. Now she owned it. And Holloway, the man who had humiliated her, sabotaged her, demoted her, he was sitting at his desk, oblivious, until Naomi stepped into his office and took his chair. Holloway's face turned ghostly pale. "Good morning," she said, crossing her legs as she leaned back into the leather seat. "I hope you'll take this professionally." And then, with a satisfied smile, she slid a paper across the desk. His termination notice. The moment Naomi Johnson took her seat in the CEO's office, she knew she wasn't just winning a battle, she was about to rewrite history. It wasn't enough to remove the rot from Crestwood and Lane. She needed to burn down everything they stood for and build something that no one could take from her again. So when Holloway sat across from her, his face drained of color, clutching his termination notice like it was a bad dream, Naomi didn't smirk. She didn't gloat, because she wasn't finished yet. Not even close. Holloway sat frozen, his fingers gripping the edges of the paper like it might disappear if he held on tight enough. His lips parted, but for the first time in his life he had no words. He scanned the document again, hoping, praying, that this was some kind of joke. Termination, effective immediately. He was being removed from the company he had run for 17 years. He had hired Naomi, dismissed her, humiliated her, and now she was signing his exit. The silence stretched. Naomi leaned forward, resting her elbows on the desk that used to be his. "I assume you'll take this professionally?" she asked, voice smooth as silk. Holloway's nostrils flared. "You can't do this." Naomi raised an eyebrow. "Oh, I can." And I did. He slammed a fist onto the desk. "This is my company." Correction. Naomi folded her hands. "It was your company. Now it's mine." His breath came fast, eyes darting wildly like a trapped animal. He was unraveling. "I built this place from the ground up. You don't have the power to do this." Naomi smiled, slow and deliberate. "You still don't get it, do you?" She slid another document across the table, the new ownership agreement. Holloway's name wasn't on it. Not as an executive, not as a shareholder, and not at all. He had nothing. No golden parachute, no severance, no safety net. Because while Holloway had been busy playing games, Naomi had been strategizing. She had dug into his financials. She had uncovered illegal tax write-offs, fraudulent transactions, hidden slush funds. And when she presented it to the board, they hadn't just agreed to remove him, they begged her to. Holloway's hands shook as he flipped through the document, his skin turning an ugly shade of red. "You vindictive little—" "Careful," Naomi warned, her voice soft but lethal. "HR is still in the building, and unlike you, I actually enforce harassment policies." Holloway let out a sharp breath. chest rising and falling rapidly. He was losing control. His entire world was crumbling. Naomi stood, walking toward the window. From up here, she could see the entire city. The same city that had once told her there were limits to how far a black woman could go. But today, she had shattered every last one of them. Behind her, Holloway gritted his teeth. "You think you're untouchable now?" Naomi turned, giving him a cool glance. "I think I'm in charge now." Holloway shot up from his seat. "You have no idea what you're doing. This company is—" "A financial disaster?" Naomi cut in. "Oh, I know." Holloway stilled. "Did you really think I bought Crestwood just to settle a personal vendetta?" Naomi scoffed. This company was on the verge of collapse. And the funny thing? You never even saw it coming. Holloway's mouth opened, then closed. He had thought he was the mastermind, the one always 5 steps ahead. But Naomi? She had been 10. Holloway was still standing when the security team arrived. Naomi barely acknowledged them. "Escort Mr. Holloway out." The words were final. For a moment, Holloway hesitated, like he might refuse, might try to fight. But then he saw the security officers step closer, hands hovering near their radios. And he knew. It was over. The walk of shame Holloway had forced so many employees to take over the years. Now, it was his turn. Naomi watched as he stormed out of the office, shoving past stunned employees who had stopped mid-email, mid-phone call, mid-coffee sip to stare. And then, the whispers started. By noon, the news had spread. Crestwood and Lane's entire executive structure had shifted overnight. The biggest corporate shakeup of the decade. Investors were watching. The media was watching. And Naomi? She wasn't just in the spotlight, she was controlling it. Naomi could have stopped there. She could have just taken Holloway's job and called it a day. But she didn't just want to replace the system. She wanted to dismantle it. She called an emergency all-hands meeting. Employees flooded into the main conference hall, some curious, some nervous, some still reeling from the day's events. And when Naomi took the stage, she didn't give them a speech. She gave them a reality check. For years, this company has thrived on inequality, on shutting out talent, on silencing the very people who built its success. A ripple of unease spread through the room, because they all knew it was true. And then Naomi dropped the bombshell. That era ends today. She clicked a button on her remote. A massive screen lit up behind her. The new leadership structure. The all-white, all-male executive board, gone. The toxic managers who had fueled the company's downfall, fired. Diversity in leadership, effective immediately. She had rewritten the rules. But as Naomi's success spread, Holloway wasn't done. He tried to sue. He claimed she had stolen the company out from under him, that it had been a hostile takeover. But Naomi had one final checkmate. The investigative journalists she had tipped off, they published everything. Every illegal deal, every corrupt backroom decision, every racist policy. Holloway had tried to silence Naomi. But now, he was the one being erased. Months later, Naomi sat in the very office Holloway once ruled. Only now, it was hers. Crestwood wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. New policies, new leadership. A company that finally reflected the brilliance of the people running it. And as for Holloway, disgraced, blacklisted, broke. He had underestimated Naomi, and it had cost him everything. Naomi leaned back in her chair, staring out at the city. She had won, not just for herself, but for every single person who had ever been told they weren't good enough. For every woman, for every black employee, for every person who had been overlooked, undervalued, and discarded. She had been given a demotion, and in return, she had taken everything